So the Writer in Your Neighborhood event is a tradition here at the Athenaeum. It's been going probably for close to a decade now, and it's a chance to celebrate our community, our writing community here in Salem and on the North Shore. We invite 5 to 10 writers, especially writers who might have a book out recently that they want to let people know about, and invite them to share a little bit of their work so you can get a taste of what they're about. A big part of this event is just getting to meet new writers, and I encourage, and new people, not just writers. So I encourage you to talk to the person next to you, especially if you don't know them, and get to meet some other folks in the Salem area. We schedule this event, we try to schedule one around the holiday season because some of you might be looking for gifts, and if you are, voila, there is a table of the writers' books, so you can sample what they have and then go celebrate them by buying their books. On your chairs, you should have gotten a little pink form which lists all the writers. I am not going to read these impressive bios before each writer. They will just come up when it is their turn. We'll be going in alphabetical order, and when they're done, they'll sit down and the next writer will come up. So our writers today, I'll just list them all now though: Sara Johnson Allen, Jennifer Freed, E.E. Holmes, Ben Mazer, Amjed McDonnell, Carla Panciera, and Clay Ventre. So we will hear from each of those. You'll get it. Oh, did I take it wrong? Yes. Okay. Sorry. We'll hear from each of those in our first. Okay, good. Thanks, Kevin. I don't know what I'd do without you. Our first reader will be Sara Johnson Allen.
Everyone, thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate being in the space. I'm going to read to you from my debut novel, a work of literary fiction with like maybe a little Southern fiction edge. Down Here We Come Up. And it came out on August 1st, and I had this realization this week. On Monday night, I did a reading at City Lights in San Francisco, which was awesome. It's like a career highlight for a writer to be in that space. But then I was realizing, okay, that was Monday. I also teach full-time to Indica. I have 3 kids. It's been busy. What else is this week? Oh, Salem Athenaeum, great. And you know what I realized? I started this book in many ways here. I used to live in Salem. I live in Ipswich now, but I was a member of the Salem Athenaeum, and I believe there was a space upstairs I used to hide in. So this, I think, is the last stop of my book tour that started August 1st in Wilmington, and it means the world to me to be in this space where I only realized today, oh my God, you were born here. Okay, so I'll just read on the prologue and just a little bit of the first chapter. Jackie Jessup's apology to her daughter Kate refused to get lost in the stagnant air of her death. It rustled the tobacco leaves in the field beside her bungalow. It snaked through silver turkey houses and ripe hog lagoons before traveling across the acreage, being clear-cut for subdivisions east of Fayetteville. From there, it moved way down south, under concrete overpasses, caught by sinking bayous on one side and rising seas on the other. The apology skimmed the rubble of neighborhoods left ruined and rotting after last year's Category 5, when the levees broke and everything low was left to drown. Jackie's apology moved west, across a country split into ill-fitting parts, some of the divisions made by gray lines on a map, some by beliefs handed down. Other breaks were created by different angles on the same story, because as Jackie had said to her children many times, a person cannot stand in 2 places at once. Use that to your advantage. Near Fort Worth, in the hot, dry middle, Jackie's apology lagged, barely moved at all, although the words were still there. I should not have kept you from your daughter, but you kept me from mine. It was as close to an apology a stubborn con artist like Jackie could offer. In the end, her daughter heard none of it. Kate did not hear that which had traveled so far, so fast, too late. At the moment of her mother's death, Kate was driving over the bridge of the Americas into Juarez. She was crossing a border so wide, it could only be partially sewn shut with razor wire, surveillance cameras, and border police. It was a divide not unlike the one between people who love each other in complicated ways, but cannot hear what needs to be said. And I'll just read a little bit from chapter 1. Kate learned from Jackie all the different ways to calculate a value. There was a thing's market value, the perceived value, the true value, the if the buyer was drunk value. There was the value of everything that fell between cracks on the car seats, between the cracks of the car seats of men staying over. Kate and her twin brother Luke had the job of reaching down into the tight spaces for escaped cash or jewelry. They could at least swipe a few CDs to sell, but not so many that the man, whoever he was this time, would notice he had been picked through. Early on, Jackie insisted her children pocket food from the free lunch program at school for dinner. 2 for 1, she called it. Jackie switched the price tags on items in the grocery store until the food line introduced barcode scanners. She got away with it at the Piggly Wiggly for nearly another year, but eventually, even the older grocery stores caught up. Jackie saw everything. Like the time she noticed from the back pew on a Sunday morning in March, when it was just starting to get good and hot, the preacher's wife, sweating through the back of her shirt, unfortunately white, showing a series of bruises across her shoulder blades. That warranted Jackie's eyes narrowing slightly, the church bulletin flipped over, and a note made in her formal old-fashioned cursive. That was their short-lived period as Free Will Baptist, before they had been Seventh Day, then just run-of-the-mill Southern Baptist. Jackie eventually gave it up altogether because time was money, and unless she could pull something back from the little she put in the offering plates, she might as well focus her resources elsewhere. The kind of value Jackie hunted for went far beyond monetary. A bird in the hand was worth 2 in the bush. A pack of smokes was more valuable on the bedside table than all the way in the living room. An envelope mailed to yourself and left unopened gave proof of the date you knew something and wrote it in a letter. The imprint of the postmark stood witness. A box of old photographs bought at a yard sale, copies of other people's rental agreements, stolen from a dumpster behind the Beach House Realty office, the yellow pages. Any scrap of information might prove to be worth something. Then again, it might not, but one could never know. Kate was no good in school, but she was a fast learner. She watched Jackie add things up, subtract out cost, look for opportunities that would yield more, whether it was a carton of Cool 100s or a white envelope stuffed with cash. Jackie could con people into anything because she saw ahead of everyone else by several moves. In a different set of circumstances, Jackie might have been a great chess player, someone who could beat the fast strategies of the men playing outside the Obama pen in Harvard Square, where Kate later followed her twin brother Luke when he received enough merit and need-based scholarship, plus loan money, that it didn't matter, he had no actual money. Kate's brother Luke had their mother's sense of scope, of patience for making one move that led to another, then another, eventually landing where he wanted. I'm getting out of here, he whispered to Kate in the darkness of the bedroom they shared. When? How? Soon. College. He was not even 10 years old. Kate lacked her brother's patience. If Luke and Jackie were glaciers capable of steady, long-term calculation and grinding pressure, Kate was a volcano. She learned to spread sparks that eventually burned so fierce They devoured all the oxygen, leaving only black ash. Not every fire Kate set was intentional, but most were useful, because another thing Jackie had taught her children was how to look for buried shine where everyone else saw rubble. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. I'm Jennifer Freed, and I'm going to set a timer because I really don't have a good sense of how many poems I can read, and I have a book of poems. So my book is called When Light Shifts, and I'm showing you the cover because the cover is done by my mother. So my mother was an artist. And she started actually later in life. She was always very talented, but she was being a business person, and then she got diagnosed with cancer, and she said, I gotta do art. So she did. The story is really a memoir in the form of poems. And so I'm gonna read you a couple poems from near the beginning of the book, and let's see, here we go. The first poem I read you kind of sets the scene because the memoir tells the story of her stroke and its aftermath and how that affects family relationships. And it's kind of a journey from the hospital and her quest to get home. But in order to know how big a journey it is, I wanted to start with what she was like before. She was about 81 when she had her stroke. She was regularly mistaken for someone in her 70s. She climbed ladders. She regrouted her own shower stall. She finished furniture. She loaded the furniture into my station wagon because she just loved as a hobby refinishing furniture. And then I would bring it to sell it for her at a consignment store. So that's what she was doing when she had her stroke. She was refinishing a rocking chair. So this first poem is called Leaving, and this is before her stroke. This visit, I look at the blue of my mother's eyes as she talks with my teenage daughters. She wears my father's frayed button-down, now mottled with wood stain and paint. Her hair, cut short, shows the shape of her skull. She returns to the garage, slides past the table she's been sanding, and points out two planters, glazed ceramic, cobalt blue, from a yard sale, for me, too heavy for her. I take in her laugh, her crooked lower teeth. When I kiss her, I bend lower than I used to. Her skin smells of warmth and wood, a lingering of Shalimar. There she is now, behind the glass of her front door, one hand raised in goodbye, mouthing, I love you, as we pull out of the driveway. I say to my girls, look, isn't she beautiful? And the older one says, yes. And the younger one says, but why do you keep saying that? And I think I don't know what to say, but my mouth is already answering. My mouth says, because I know she's going to leave. So she had a stroke, as I said, while painting a rocking chair. I think painting. And it was a cerebral hemorrhage, and the doctors said she would die before morning. She didn't. She's still with us now. She's changed. So this is called cerebral hemorrhage. And I actually, JD, I've unsuccessfully set my timer, so just tell me where I am. Cerebral hemorrhage. They say she will die before morning. We lean toward her breath, stroke her hair, and night becomes dawn, becomes dusk, and she wakes, opens her mouth, not her eyes. A word we do not hear. Her arm rises, fingers strum air. She sinks into stillness. Now they say, if she lives, they can't say who she will be. We sit beside her silence, holding her warmth in our palms, not knowing how long to hold on to goodbye. That's another aspect of the journey of this book is journey from who she was to her understanding of the new personality that she had become, because the hemorrhage caused permanent brain damage. So there's a whole kind of theme of identity going on and how the different family members relate to a person who at first didn't recognize that she wasn't the same and that she couldn't do the things that she had been able to do. So the next poem that I read is called Rehab Hospital, and it's not a traditional poem. It's actually made up of a whole bunch of incomplete phrases right across the page. So I'm sorry if it's hard to process a whole bunch of incomplete phrases. It's also depicting what it's like to be kind of the caregiver for your parents, and just that overload of information when the healthcare professionals are just telling you everything, but you're kind of still in shock because your mother just had a stroke. So this is called Rehab Hospital. Your mother's brain. She isn't currently. Someone will need to. Please explain to your father. Please have your father, given your father's hearing problems, given your father's, do you have power of attorney? Your mother's medical, your mother's legal, your mother's wishes in case of. Please provide a copy of, and a copy of, also a copy of. Please discuss with your father. Please explain to your father. Please send. Please sign. Don't bring food from home. Don't leave her alone with her tray. Don't let her drink anything, I mean anything, without adding thickener. Make sure you tell all her visitors. Can't emphasize enough. Risk of choking. Risk of choking. Risk of choking. 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 Therapy every, reevaluate every, schedule posted every, update you every, always stand on her left. She has no idea she's not. See how she doesn't? We call this neglect. She has left side neglect. The nature of her injury can no longer automatically how to stand, how to go. Now a conscious sequence of, okay, I guess it did work. That was 8 minutes. Stop, sorry. Now a conscious sequence of requires extreme concentration. The nature of her injury, extreme difficulty concentrating. We encourage families to watch so you can learn how to, so you know what to do when. Please don't talk to her while. Her need to focus. Your father doesn't seem to. Please explain to your father. Please don't help her. Please let her. Your father doesn't. Please remind your father. Your mother is doing so well. She brushed her own teeth. Your mother is doing so well. She held her own spoon. Your mother is doing so well. We'll miss her when. Oh no, we don't do that. Rehab hospitals don't. Medicare doesn't. 3 weeks is standard. The standard stay, 3 weeks is 3 weeks. And that was written a little bit with the frustration that people who have brain damage get the same 3 weeks as someone who maybe has a torn ligament in their knee. But my mother went from here to here. And, do I have time for just one more that will end on a lighter note, or had I better not?
Sure.
Okay. So I don't want you to think that everything in here is all sad. There were moments of levity. And this is a poem that also takes place in the rehab hospital. And it's called Unfiltered Light. And one of the aspects of my mother's brain damage was that she lost her own filter. So again, my father was 92, my mother was 81. Unfiltered light. In the sunlit exercise room, my mother sits beside a balding, bearded man in a motorcycle jacket to practice clipping clothespins to a paper cup. Across the square table, a rapidly blinking teen and a woman with deep wrinkles and purple hair. They work in heavy silence. The therapist encourages them to use just one hand. Don't forget, this is healing not just your body, but your brain. She passes out putty, demonstrates how to gather it into a ball, then flatten it with only the fingers. Motorcycle man keeps dropping his putty. The blinking boy breathes heavily. The purple-haired woman bites her lip, slows, revives when the daughter sitting behind her pats a shoulder, whispers in her ear. My father holds my mother's right hand to keep her from using it. His eyes won't stay open. His body sags sideways. My mother tells him it's time for his nap, looks for his hat. Before he can step away, she reaches up from her wheelchair to tug at his scarf. Come here. Don't go without a proper goodbye. They kiss. Light touches the whole table. Everyone blinks as my father straightens and my mother beams and my father smiles and my mother teases. Do I know you? I sure hope so. If I don't, I want to.
You're a not so young adult and you think young adult literature is for you, it's for you. I write about reluctant heroes. I write about people who lead ordinary lives until magic shows up one day, which I think we all low-key hope would happen to us, right? I'm still waiting for my letter from Hogwarts. I am still waiting for Gandalf to take me on an adventure. I am still waiting for the TARDIS to land in my backyard. All of these things that I wish would happen haven't happened, and so I write about them. I'm going to read just a little bit from two of my series. This first one is called Daughters of Sea and Storm. It is the first in a series about witches living on coastal Maine. And I'm going to let the books do the talking. This is from the prologue. It is from the perspective of the central character. Her name is Wren Vesper. On stormy nights, I dream of the gray man. He holds my hand and walks with me through an ocean of swaying marsh grasses beneath a mass of rolling thunderclouds. The wind whips my hair around my face and I can see the white caps on the roiling ocean in the distance. I call him the gray man because that is all I can see of him. In the gathered darkness, his features are blurred. His figure solid and yet somehow not, a companion seemingly composed of shadow or smoke. I have to look up at him and he down at me. My bare feet in the sand have the pudgy, dimpled toes of early childhood. As we walk, he whispers to me. What he whispers, I can never remember when I wake up. When I try to recall the words, I hear only the susurration of the sea breeze through the dunes and the gentle rolling of distant thunder. But in the dream, I nod my head along to his murmurs as though he is speaking the very truths that nestle in my little heart. We stop at the edge of the dunes, where the long grasses give way to a stretch of sand bleached white in the storm-drenched darkness. I look out to the crashing waves beyond. I can hear them calling to me an ancient song. The gray man bends low and whispers in my ear. And though I hear only the moan of the wind and the crackle of the lightning, I understand him. I know what will happen next. The gray man and I, hand in hand, will walk into the sea. I feel no fear, no trepidation. I only know that disappearing into the raging waters with the gray man by my side will be the most natural thing in the world. My childish heart does not pound, but thrums peacefully, like the purring of a contented cat. I am ready. I have always been ready. The sand compresses beneath my feet. I leave a trail of sunken crescent moons behind me. He leaves no footprints at all. I look up at his face, the question in my eyes. The answer he murmurs to me satisfies my youthful curiosity and fades immediately from my memory. At last the water licks at our toes, sending a delightful shiver up my spine. We pause only a moment before we walk forward, churning water swirling and bubbling over my ankles, my calves, weighing down the hem of my white summer dress. The wind howls my name, and the gray man's hand tightens around mine. I look up at him. No, at the absence of him. He's gone, and I am already forgetting what he looks like when I hear my name again. I'm suddenly cold and afraid. A frantic hand grips my shoulder. I turn, and I wake up. So that is from Daughters of Sea and Storm. That's the prologue. And then I just wanted to read a little of What the Ladies Made New, also a prologue. I'm a sucker for prologues. And this book, this series, it's a trilogy. It's called the Rift Magic Saga. All three of them are out already. Can't say the same for that first book. But I will say that I like to describe it as Harry Potter meets Downton Abbey with some Handmaid's Tale governmental bullshit. So enjoy. This is from What the Ladies Made New. The boy moved like a shadow, a piece of the night broken off and slinking across the city. He melted seamlessly from one darkened corner to the next, untouched by the guttering orange glow that danced in the glowing skulls of the street lamps. It was not only his familiarity with the streets of London that allowed him to disappear so completely within its sooty labyrinth. He felt the tingling sensation within his body, the many points at which he could connect to the light and the darkness, twitching and coaxing them like cloaks on strings, drawing them closer, wrapping himself in them, or else casting them away. This was his gift. This, he knew, was why he was chosen. It was a heretical thought. He thought it anyway, and grinned for good measure. At the end of the cobbled road down which he now traveled, the fences of the praetorium rose like so many arrows aimed at the sky. Every few minutes, the boy reached into his pocket and felt for the note. He imagined it was a talisman meant to bring him luck, and luck he would need that if nothing else was certain. The shadows nestled in the threshold of the cobbler's shop welcomed him. Even a person looking in the doorway could stare directly at the place where he stood and still not see him there. He let out a long, slow breath. Now he had to pick his moment. The Presidio, he knew from days and days of careful reconnaissance, patrolled the outer perimeter of the praetorium in pairs. Given the number of patrols and the frequency with which they passed his chosen location, the boy would have less than 5 minutes to deliver his message, receive his reply, and vanish once again into the darkness. It was at once an eternity and a breathlessly brief window of time, and it would begin as soon as the next patrol passed his hiding place. So the shadow boy waited. The sound of boots in lockstep stilled the boy's heart, and he sucked in a breath. The Presidio approached. Moments later, they appeared along the narrow walk that ran between the back of the cobblers and the high iron fence that enclosed the Praetorium. Boots clunking. The boy, still not breathing, counted to 50, slowly. By the time he had finished, his lungs were screaming for air, and the sound of the boots had faded to nothingness. He exhaled and peeled himself away from the darkness. There was no time to waste. He approached the fence, squatting down in the deepest of shadows he could find, tugging them in tightly around him. Then he reached into his pocket for the only other thing he carried, a round, smooth stone. Whispering a prayer to no one, he closed the stone. He tossed the stone through the bars and listened to the clatter it made as it bounced on the cobbles. He held his breath and began to count again. But before he had reached the number 10, he heard a shuffling of feet and a ragged drawing of breath. 5 shadows lumbered toward him out of the darkness, one of them stooping to snatch the stone up off the ground. As they closed the distance to the fence, they were revealed to be men, all bedraggled and filthy. The boy fought back and urged to run. One man stepped closer than the others, who hung back nervously. "I meant to deliver something to John Davies," the boy whispered breathlessly. "You're looking at him, lad," answered the boy, who approached the fence. "I was told you would come alone," the boy replied. "And I was told the message would be coming in the hands of a trusted associate of the movement, not some cheeky little gutter snipe now hand it over," Davies replied, baring the remaining stumps of his teeth. Shrugging, the boy retrieved the note from his pocket and handed it through the bars. Davies stood up and unfolded it hastily. Almost at once, the angry muttering began. "He's not coming. I knew it. I bloody well knew it. Didn't I tell you? Coward, that's what he is, a blustering coward. How long are we to wait then? Does he tell us that at least? No, just that they aren't coming and to be patient." Davy raised his face and met the boy's eyes. His expression was full of something unsettling, something that made the boy's chest feel hollow at the sight of it. It would be many years before he came to understand that it was despair. You're meant to burn it, sir, when you've finished reading it," the boy whispered. "Is that right?" said Davies, in a voice like a hiss. "Yes, sir, and I'm to bring back your reply if you've got one," the boy managed at last, prying the words free from the grip of the man's gaze. Davies hobbled forward, crumpling the paper in his fist as he came. When he reached the fence again, he held up the wadded note and touched his finger to it. The paper began to smoke, and within a few seconds it had been reduced to a pile of ash. "You want my reply, do you now? Well, here it is, and mind you deliver it in full. John Davies is done waiting. He's done wasting away in this hell pit, living on the dregs of broken promises. We'll take our chances without Eli Turner and his useless resistance. You tell him that from me." The boy's eyes widened. If there was something he ought to have said to this man with the wild eyes burning out of his sunken face, he could not find words. He'd swallowed and stepped back from the fence. I'll tell him, sir." John Davies turned his back on the boy and fell into huddled conference with the waiting men. The boy backed away from the fence, a strange lump in his throat. He felt something bearing down upon him, something vague and foreboding, and suddenly he could not take to his heels fast enough. He turned tail down the alleyway and fled, pulling the darkness with him as he went. The boy had not yet reached the safety of his doorstep when the first shots echoed in the night, shattering the snow-muffled stillness.
I am Ken Mason, and I'll read a poem from my new collection, The Ruined Millionaire. Monsieur Barbary Brecht. Who shall it fall upon to inspect the comings and goings of Anthony Hecht, the comings and bowings, the strummings and knowings, the summings and flowings of Anthony Hecht? Maybe the master, the shepherd and pastor, the leopard, lean, faster, that peppered forecaster, the phoenix and castor, Monsieur Barbary Brecht. Who will exhume the intelligent wanderings, the diplomat coup d'etat, government squanderings, and furious ponderings also that stem thereof, and fonder things of the late Howard Nemerov? No one more furious, curious, serious, sometimes delirious, always imperious, mighty, ambiguous, slightly conspicuous, Jane Jeffrey Simpleton, Monsieur Barbary Brecht. Who will expose as verbose the rich prose, will deface and erase its slick surface with grace, will unweave what he wove and enclose what there flows of the flaws of the prose of earnest blows? No one more hounding, more pounding, more counting, more hunting or cunting or upward fronting than the master of everything Asians depict and the roots of all madness, Monsieur Barbary Brecht. Actually, what is it I'm trying to say? Tomorrow, tonight, yesterday, and today, intangible, frangible, Monsieur Jean Mandible, irreversible, curseable, not nearly nurseable, something appealing to Barbara Hutton. I'm trying to turn myself off, but I can't find the button. I tell myself you should be more circumspect for one who's the house guest of Monsieur Barbary Brecht. General Walker inspired a stalker who hired John Pocker to be a big talker in Dallas with Alice, with much forethought malice. His background, they checked and they checked and they checked. And though it was hot and he took a pot shot, played his part to the hilt, revealed nothing of guilt, even when questioned by George Morenschild, who had made him defect, Monsieur Barbary Brecht. There are two different kinds of fuck, the fuck that's fucked and the fuck that's fucked. And in Algeria, last time I checked, both were reserved for Monsieur Barbary Brecht. Professor Pitkins had a real tight jaw. Perhaps he even wore a metal bra. But if he did, the one who could detect that this was so was Monsieur Barbary Brecht. If you see W.H. Auden, you might just have bought a diversion, a version, a red and dread sturgeon, a false bill of goods, and you may have been tricked by that master of everything which has been bricked, the one they call Mother, Monsieur Barbary Brecht. But apart from this world, where the great winds are whirled and the towers are darkened, child's play with primordial knowing of Hindus and fairies and Edmund Saint-Perry's, and all that's most out of the way, they may dig holes to China or reveal their vagina in the hall suits of armor compelling good karma. But no matter how darkness betray the extent of the world or the word, they have trekked through the inversions of Monsieur Barbary Brecht. The ghost in the wainscot is trembling and bludgeoned and wrapped in a fox that is dry and curmudgeoned. But the thespian sheets fly aloft in the air, and although there is tea, there is nobody there. There is no one to draw lines with pen and with ink, or to stain with hair coloring half of the sink. But the wrought iron is animated, and the architect of this elaborate absence is Monsieur Barbary Brecht. Try typing his name, and you might go insane at the way the hands work towards each other and then go in circles, repeating again and again one insistent motif like a tom-tom refrain, and then spiral upwards. An enigma machine couldn't do it the justice of how it is whacked on a simple corona, Monsieur Barbary Brecht. In the hall, the rich children glare and they stare at the poor little visitor who enters there, his musical prodigy greater than theirs, sends them scuttling in snide little groups up the stairs. But the hostess is compassionate and hands him a score, but he just doesn't feel up to play anymore and wonders what lies behind the magnificent door where the children all vanished and his vision is flecked by the shadowy mustache of Monsieur Barbary Brecht. If I were a 1926 model Ford, I would carry your body and then I'd have poured it over the bridge and into the river without so much as the least tiny shiver. So the love letters of little girls run, but they never have ever so nearly much fun as the brain that delights behind eyes that reflect the abductions of Monsieur Barbary Brecht. It is Christmas time and the world is still, and the windows like lenses of glass that are cracked, where the presents are stacked on the shelves, do not kill the spirit of our Savior who's come from afar, for whom the child left the door slightly ajar. The deciduous rustle of Hyborian pines shuffles in the three wise men, and the brilliant star shines, and no one could ever detect the immaculate presence of Monsieur Barbary Brecht. The spires of Mem Hall and what's trapped in the cat like the great north winds go this way and that, and no matter how anyone's ever detained by a shivery feeling, a vague sense of what's stained by what came before us or what's not yet come, there isn't a formula for doing the sum, yet all of your queries you might kindly direct to the highly compassionate Monsieur Barbary Brecht. The fire's last flicker as it falls in the shadows leaves all in the darkness of its afterglows. The winter winds whistle and somewhere a thistle is lodged in a crevice of snows. Mother and father, sister and brother, the families together and all will protect the spirit of Christmas and sing the great missal in the translation of Monsieur Barbary Brecht. Behind every brick, there's a visual trick, an encapturement that's luminoso. In the rain, in the brain, in the strain, in the wane of enrapturement, tre furioso. It's a kind of a click that may not or may stick and may trap what I meant, I suppose so. Like back issues of old magazines might reflect a spectrum of tissues, Monsieur Barbary Brecht. Dante and Berryman and Bernard Harriman all can be found here, can be seen and sound here. It makes no difference what order, what corridor, except as causations perceived as sensation. No border can thwart or export or condense here, or give any quarter to the immense sense here of Nemirov, Tamarov, Bellow, or Hecht, all one the domain of Monsieur Barbary Brecht. So tell me just how, if they are indivisible, we need them. We see them when they are invisible. The order they see to is perfectly cracked. Call in the correctives, Monsieur Barbary Brecht. The films of the 40s, the great women's films, are baked on the surfaces of post boxes and kilns, like the whisper of porcelain, the threads of empire that visit the sky and retire in the spire. They expire in the senses for one and for all, one vast waiting ocean, the windows recall, with curtains and window seats holding hopes checked, but nothing's arrived today, Monsieur Barbary Brecht. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Amjed McDonnell. Can you hear me? My name's Amjed McDonnell, and my book is called Beneath My Mother's Feet. It's a young adult novel, and it comes out of a time where I lived in Pakistan for 5 years. And it was the first time I'd been overseas for any period of time at all. I grew up in Ohio most of my life. And it was my first experience with child labor. And when I returned to the United States, I just couldn't get
the children out of my head, and that's how the story was born. I'm just gonna read to you the first scene in the first chapter. The musky scent of mustard oil intensified in the early August heat. Nausea ran a hand across her tightly braided hair, then wiped the oil on the front of her rumpled camise. A yellowish stain seeped into the cotton fabric of her shirt, and she regretted it immediately. Less than a week into the new school year, and already her starched white uniform was permanently stained. She grabbed a handful of sand from the side of the road and rubbed it in, hoping the earth would soak up at least some of the dense oil and save her from Mama's scolding. She stood at the edge of the Gizri cloth bazaar, the afternoon sun pressing against her bare arms, face, and neck. Her house was in view just across the street, past the cricket pitch, where a group of boys ran back and forth between the wickets, stirring up the dust. The bazaar was on the outskirts of Gizri Colony, a working-class neighborhood in southern Karachi, and just a few kilometers from the Arabian Sea. Because the bazaar was 2 blocks long and adjacent to the Gizri School for Girls, it was nearly impossible to walk by day after day without getting drawn into the enticing apparel. Maliha and Sara moved from stall to stall, tugging at silks and chiffons that fluttered from overhanging displays. Nazia shuffled along behind them and turned her gaze towards the main road that separated the bazaar from the cricket field. Beyond the steady rumble of cars, bicycles, buses, rickshaws, trucks, taxis, and slower animal-drawn vehicles, the fielders scrambled forward to catch a high ball, their bare hands cupped together to ease the impact. She sighed when Maliha called out to her. Why couldn't she be the batsman on the cricket pitch, poised for the bowler's next pitch, instead of looking at clothes she could not afford? This one. Maliha unraveled a bolt of cloth and held a corner of the sheer material in the air. The gold brocade shimmered against the pink chiffon. It's perfect for your jahaz. Nazia wrinkled her nose. Amma could dress the entire school with all the clothes she'd make from my dowry. We don't need to add another. The strap of her backpack cut into her shoulder. She winced and shifted the weight to the other side. Come on, I have to get home or Amma will be worried. She turned back towards the busy road and began walking. You're always so afraid of your mother, Sara complained. She's not afraid, Maliha said. She's just a good Beti, a dutiful daughter. Nazia lifted her chin higher and quickened her pace to escape their playful jabs. She'd known the 2 girls since Montessori. She knew their lives were no different than hers. Maliha dropped the cloth onto the cart and followed Nazia to the main road. The stall owner wrapped the material back into place. Once you get married, it won't matter anymore what color you like. Your mother decides now, and when you get married, your mother-in-law will take her place. Maliha looked pointedly at Nazia, but kept walking. And you, Nazia, will agree to everything, just like you always do. Nazia looked at her friend sharply. You know that will never change. Our lives will always be in the hands of our mothers, whether we like it or not. Sara hurried to keep pace with them, her school bag constantly falling off her thick shoulders. My mother always says that you can eat whatever you like, but you have to wear what others choose. Maliha snorted. You eat everything in sight. Nazia remained silent, having heard the same words from her own mother time and time again. She stopped at the edge of the street, squinting to avoid the flashy sunlight that bounced from car to car. She waited for an opening to cross. The street was teeming with Suzuki trucks, compact cars, and ornately decorated buses. An occasional Tonga clattered by, the driver and his passenger perched atop the 2-wheeled wooden cart, pulled by a donkey daring enough to brave the traffic. The day's pollution had settled and a haze hung over the city. Nazia pulled out a scarf from her backpack, the dupatta that should have been on her head, and pressed it against her face to keep from breathing in exhaust fumes. When she saw an opening, she clutched her backpack and dashed across the street, jumping over the median to the other side. Come on. She looked back to make sure her friends had made it, then headed down the street that ran along the cricket field. A horn blasted loudly behind her, and she jerked to the right. A truck rumbled past, the flatbed crammed with men, their bodies jostling as the truck sped over bumps and craters in the unpaved road. she spotted her father. What was he doing home at this time of day? He was half sitting, half lying down. It seemed as though the men were cradling his body. The truck sped on, leaving behind a cloud of dust. She broke into a run, her bag bouncing against her back. Malia and Sara scrambled to keep up. The game of cricket stopped, and Nausea knew that the players were wondering if one of their fathers was on the truck.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carla Panciera. It's really amazing to hear all these different stories and to think that in one lifetime I could be here with all of these other writers talking, and maybe if this was 40 or 50 years ago, I would not be with you because I would be milking some of the 225 cows on my family's farm. So this is preferable. I'm going to be reading from my memoir called Barn Flower, Rhode Island Farm Memoir. I'm going to be reading, it took me about 30 years to compile the chapters of this book, and this is the last one. This was the final one. It's called Crazy. The way unloading the hay wagon worked on other farms. One person tossed bales from the wagon. A second person gathered them, stuck them on the conveyor spikes so they could be transported to the uppermost reaches of the loft, where the final person would pull them off and pack them tightly beneath the eaves. 3 people, ideally, impervious to the heat, the floating dust and spores of dried grasses, the occasional blood evidence of snake or mouse caught up in the baler's teeth. My father might have preferred help if someone had been stupid enough to ask him and courageous enough to await his response. My brother-in-law Bill in the milking parlor alone when my father came in late from haying might also have preferred help. But there were those days when one person was the only solution, impractical as it was. It can wait, we thought, the rest of us thought. Hay can be unloaded the next morning when someone shows up for work. My father thought, but rain, but tomorrow's chores. We thought, we all did, that my father was crazy. When we set the table for the annual Father's Day London broil, for example, and he was 2 hours late from the fields because the harrow broke. When everyone went home after milking, and he stayed up until 2 a.m. soldering a leaky pipe. When he had a stomach virus and had to leave milking every few minutes to vomit, only to return to continue the job. Something's wrong with him, we'd say. One night, supper half eaten, my father left Bill in the milking parlor and went to unload the wagon. First, he climbed on the load and tossed a few bales down. Then he impaled the bales on the conveyor spikes and clambered to the top of the loft, barely in time to retrieve them. I should say my father was probably in his late 60s at this time. 3 or 4 bales at a time, he began the job of storing 100 plus bales. Did he tire? Another stupid question. But he must have, and this would explain why one of the spokes eventually tore into his leg, leaving an 8-inch gash. Get one of those butterfly things, he said when he came into the house. Because of his skin grafts, his legs were burnt in World War II. His legs bled easily through the wet cloth my mother wrapped around the wound, bled onto the linoleum, bled onto her hands, through several of the bandages she tried to apply. When she suggested he put his foot up to help stop the bleeding, he reminded her he still hadn't finished the job. He couldn't be in the house all night. A little peroxide, a butterfly or two, and then the rest of the load, more hours of milking. He lived for the next few days, but haying continued and milking. Begrudgingly at meals, he allowed my mother to rebandage the gash as he ate a few mouthfuls, then returned to what other tasks needed attention. When the wound's edges finally blackened, when my mother finally refused to administer her rudimentary first aid, when he began to run a low-grade temperature and had bled through several pairs of the dark gray dickies he wore every day, he finally agreed to go to the emergency room, but not to shower first, not to change out of his barn clothes. I'm all right, he said, climbing into the car. Would be fine if you just put another one of those stupid things on it. I told you to get it real tight. My mother rolled down her window so I could poke my head in. Be nice, I said to him. He waved me off, then called me back. I told you, we just treated Sandy with antibiotics. Make sure Bill doesn't milk her or we'll have to dump the whole load. Got it. And if that goddamn guy shows up to fix the tractor, tell him it's about goddamn time. Yep. Now my mother was backing out so he could call out his own window. You got 2 cows and cycles at the end of milking. When he saw my mother get out alone, he called in to where I was hosing down the parlor. I'll finish up here, he said. We both knew trouble when we saw it. My mother ran herself a glass of water as I stood in the doorway, peeling off my barn clothes and depositing them into the washing machine beside me. I had just gotten my driver's license. I'd go to my father in the hospital, see if I could smooth over what must be a volatile situation. My father restricted to bed. No use, my mother said. They gave him something to sleep or to give the nurses some peace, not sure which. The emergency doctor remembered him from when he tore his eye on that branch. Thinking about slowing down any Aldo, he said. I thought your father'd get up and leave right then. Instead, he said, and do what, Doc? Work on my golf game? If I had been there, he would have wagged his eyebrows at me as if to say, aren't I clever? I'm sure he made no such eye contact with my mother. The wound was too old to be stitched, but the doctor did disinfect it and applied a new bandage a step or two above the butterfly response. The doctor told him it would take some time to heal. Then he said, need to get you a bed. Said, already got a bed, I said. Pitch perfect. The doctor, a brave man who had been a medic in Korea, said he needed to admit him that he needed a strong course of antibiotics. He told him he'd have to stay at least a night. Well, your father got right off the table and shook his head. Sorry, Doc, he said, I can't stay here. I got cows to milk. And the doctor said, if you don't stay here, you'll be milking them on one leg. So he stayed, I said, expecting him to come stomping in to finish her story and to ask me how the hell we got done so early if we did everything he told us to do. My mother smirked. Well, I said, he would learn at last that he could rest and that his farm wouldn't crumble. We'd do chores and be done in a reasonable amount of time. One day, what could possibly go wrong? The wound proved more stubborn than just an overnight dose of antibiotics could fix. When my father checked in, as he did a few times a day, I had all good news to report. What about those cows that were in heat? I called Eastern breeders, technician bred them in the morning. Also tractor guy came, so that's all set. You remembered Sandy? We had. Bailing tomorrow, I said. 2 of my nephews had volunteered to help if I let them drive the tractor. Before I hung up, I said, oh, and Dad, I miss you. I like to say this because there would always be a beat of quiet before he said, okay, honey, good night now. The last night he was in the hospital, I washed the supper dishes, admiring how light it remained despite being after 6 o'clock, and was surprised to see Bill follow a group of cows out of the milking parlor door and jump over the fence towards the house. He stepped into the kitchen, stopped on the rug. One of the young cows seems to be choking on something, he said. I think it's Delilah's daughter. I put her in the shed in case you wanted to take a look. Choking. I hadn't encountered this before. I studied the telephone receiver, but decided to check her out first myself. One more night of rest for my father. We'd done well so far. Desiree arched her back and labored to breathe. I ran my fingers inside her mouth to see if I could feel anything. Eyes widening, she jerked her head, yanking on the rope, but only a few wheezing breaths traveled up my arm. I have to call my dad, I said. Bill nodded. Let me know if you need any help. Of course, I'm not sure what I could do with something like this. When I was younger, my father warned me not to swing on the pasture gate, but I did, and the hinge broke. One night, I snuck down to the freestall, started up one of the trucks, and took my friend Corinne for a joyride through the pastures until the truck got stuck in a swampy area. When we couldn't dig it out ourselves with the flattened Pepsi can we found on the floor, I left it there for my father to rescue. We called him and the hot water ran out in the house, came in to get him on his rare nights off when we couldn't strip a cow's quarter because she kicked so violently from the pain, or when the heifers bucking around in a crowded pen knocked a waterer off and gallons of water gushed from the pipe. Now, Bill walked across the holding area and into the parlor the way so many times I had returned to my own life while my father solved the problem. I stood beside the poor cow for a few minutes waiting, but for what? No one was on the way. Thank you.
That was good. So, I have just finished a kind of grueling semester in my work at Salem State. And it was just so nice to sit and listen to good words. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Can we just have a round of applause for everything?